Welcome back to Learn with Chris. I'm Chris. Today I'm going to continue reading from the Saga of the Volsungs, and we're going to look at chapter 3. However, before we do that, let's do a quick recap of chapter 2, which was about the birth of Volsung. So remember that Rare, Volsung's father, ate from the apple given to him, and his wife got pregnant. Although it was a very long pregnancy, she was pregnant for 6 years until she finally had the baby cut out of her. However, his father, Volsung's father, Rare, died on campaign, and he took sick from some illness, died, and of course that means he was unable to go to Valhalla because he did not die in battle. So the child Volsung was born after being cut out of his mother, but because he was in her for 6 years, he was a 6-year-old child born, not a baby. His mother died, of course, in that childbirth, and Volsung became the king because now both of his parents would be dead at that point. When Volsung grew up, the giant Hrimnir sent his daughter Hjoth for Volsung to marry, and she was the wish maiden or Valkyrie who brought the apple to Rare in the first place. So they were married and they were happy, and they had 10 sons and 1 daughter, the primary son being Sigmund and the daughter being called Signy. And the last part of the chapter 2 talks about a tree called Barnstalk in King Volsung's palace. So, chapter 3, first paragraph. There was a king called Sigurd who ruled over Jotaland. He was a powerful king and had many followers. He paid a visit to King Volsung and asked for Signy's hand in marriage. The king took the proposal well, as did his sons, but Signy, for her part, was unwilling. Even so, she asked her father to make the decision, as he did in other matters that concerned her. It seemed advisable to the king to betroth her, and she was promised to King Sigurd. When the banquet and the marriage were to take place, King Sigurd was to feast at King Volsungs. So we're introduced to a new person, Sigurd, who is king of Jotaland, which is in southern Sweden. So he must have heard of maybe the beauty or the excellence of the Volsung children, and he wanted to marry Signy, probably to become attached to the Volsung family line. He came and asked to marry Signy, and Volsung agreed to that, although she was not very happy about that. Doesn't say why. Maybe Sigurd was ugly, doesn't say, but she accepted the decision of her father, which of course would have been extremely common and normal, 1,000 years ago. Obviously, the father was the one who made all of the decisions in the family, so that's pretty standard. Paragraph 2. Using the best provisions, the king made ready for the feast. When the banquet was fully prepared, the guests of King Volsung and King Sigurd came on the appointed day, and King Sigurd had many worthy men with him. It is said that large fires were kindled in the long hearths running the length of the hall, but in the middle of the hall stood the great tree that earlier was mentioned. So, short paragraph here, just saying that they're going to have a feast to celebrate the wedding, of course, and the guests of both kings would come. And it does mention the tree, again, Barnstalk, because, in the next paragraph, we're going to see why. So let's just jump into the next paragraph. It is now told that when people were sitting by the fires in the evening, a man came into the hall. He was not known to the men by sight. He was dressed in this way. He wore a mottled cape that was hooded. He was barefoot and had linen breeches tied around his legs. As he walked up to Barnstock, he held a sword in his hand, while over his head was a low-hanging hood. He was very tall and grey with age, and he had only one eye. He brandished the sword and thrust it into the trunk so that it sank up to the hilt. Words of welcome failed everyone. Then the man began to speak. He who draws this sword out of the trunk shall receive it from me as a gift, and he himself shall prove that he has never carried a better sword than this one. So, a description of Odin, of course. One eye, of course, is the thing that gave it away. Although it's a little bit strange that nobody knew who he was. So Odin's all through the Saga of the Volsungs, and nobody ever knows who he is, which is very strange. So Odin. So this story, of course, is very, very reminiscent of Excalibur in the stone. Of course, King Arthur pulling out the sword Excalibur. And I looked into it a little bit, and the story of King Arthur was written down in the 1100s, and this was written down in the 1200s. However, both stories go back centuries before that they were written down. So it's not exactly clear which one came first, or if the story of Arthur influenced the writer or the storytellers of the Saga of the Volsungs, or vice versa. We don't know. Or it's also possible that both stories developed independently from each other as well. But it's very reminiscent of pulling the sword from the stone in King Arthur, Excalibur. They don't say the name of the sword here, but they will later, so I'll leave it for that. And I'll also spoil a little bit, but this sword will be broken and it will be reforged. And again, that's very reminiscent of The Lord of the Rings, and that's exactly where Tolkien gets this idea from. So Odin, with the sword, he drives the sword into the trunk of the tree, all the way up to the hilt. And he says that whoever can take it out will own it. It'll be a gift from me, and it'll be the best sword that you've ever had. And it's interesting. Words of welcome failed everyone. So a guy comes into the wedding feast with a sword in his hand, which probably not a big deal, of course, because they're Vikings. But he doesn't say anything, and he just walks up to the tree and just drives the sword into the tree. Everybody's looking at him like, what? So words of welcome failed everyone. That's a nice quote. So let's continue with the third paragraph. Then this old man walked out of the hall, and nobody knew who he was or where he was going. They stood up now, and no one disputed whether or not to grasp the sword. Each thought the one who reached it first would be best off. The noblest men went up to it first, and then each of the others. No one who came forward succeeded in moving it, no matter how hard, no matter what way they tried. Now Sigmund, the son of King Volsung, came forward. He grasped the sword and drew it from the trunk. It was as if the sword lay loose for him. The weapon seemed so good to everyone that no one recalled ever seeing so fine a sword. Sigurd offered to weigh Sigmund out triple the sword's weight in gold, to which Sigmund answered, You could have taken this sword from where it stood, no less than I did, if it were meant for you to carry it. But now it has come first into my hands. You will never attain it, even should you offer me all the gold you own. King Sigurd became angry at these words and thought the answer scornful. But since he was a very underhanded and deceitful man, he pretended not to care about this matter. That same evening, however, he thought of a means of paying Sigmund back. And this is what later came about. Okay, so that's the end of the third paragraph. I'm sorry, the last paragraph of chapter 3. So Odin, so he puts the sword in, says whoever takes out the sword can own it, and it'll be the best sword you've ever owned. And he just walks out. He walks out of the feast. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows where he went. Now everybody got up and they attempted to pull the sword out of the tree. Exactly the same as the story, of course, from King Arthur trying to pull Excalibur out of the stone. Everybody failed. They couldn't even budge it. They couldn't move it a little bit until Sigmund tried, the most important son of King Volsung. And it was as if the sword lay loose for him. So when he went up to pull it, it just came out like nothing, right? He got the sword now, so Sigmund has the sword, and and King Sigurd, the guy marrying his Sigmund's twin sister, Signy, offered him triple the sword's weight in gold. So a lot of gold. And Sigmund basically says, you couldn't get the sword out, so it's not meant for you. I did, it's meant for me. And I even if you gave me all the gold in your kingdom, I wouldn't sell you the sword. Sigurd is angry about this, but because he's an underhanded and deceitful man, he pretended not to be annoyed by it, and then he goes off and plots something to get back Sigmund, which of course is going to be in the next paragraph. Okay, so let's do a recap or summary of chapter 3. So chapter 3 is basically about Sigmund pulling the sword from the tree, from Barnstock. So just as a recap, a king from Sweden, King Sigurd, comes to ask for Signy's hand in marriage. Volsung, her father, agrees to it. They have a wedding feast, of course. Odin shows up with the best sword anybody's ever seen, and he drives it into the tree Barnstock, saying that whoever can pull out the sword will own it, and it'll be a gift from me, and it'll be the best sword you've ever owned. Everybody tries. Everybody fails to pull it out of the tree after Odin walks away. Nobody knows who he is. And Sigmund, the primary son of Volsung, he successfully pulls out the sword. It is now his sword, and he doesn't become a king like in King Arthur's story. But King Sigurd offers a bunch of gold for the sword to buy it from Sigmund, and Sigmund is not having any of that. And Sigurd basically wants revenge for being told off by Sigmund, and he probably also wants the sword as well. Okay, so that's chapter 3. Sigmund draws the sword from Barnstock, the tree. Thank you for listening. I hope this was entertaining. We'll be back in a couple of days with chapter 4, Sigurd's revenge, or at least his plot of revenge. So, trying to build up some suspense. So, thank you for listening. Have a good day. Bye-bye.